My oldest, Riley, my oldest child, my oldest daughter, was to have introduced me this morning, and she overlooked it, and that's okay. So I'll introduce myself. Oh, it wasn't in her script, she says. That's probably my fault. Definitely not her mother, since it's Mother's Day. Well, anyway, my name is Collin Taylor, and I'm a member of this church. I'm an elder in this church. For a long, long time, I was the United Methodist pastor, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. But currently, for the last year and a half, what I've been doing for work is working for my alumni, my college, where I went to school 25 years ago in Shreveport, Louisiana. So I do fundraising for the athletics department at Centenary College of Louisiana. So I get to work with all the coaches and a lot of the student athletes, and we get to learn about what they're passionate about, what's important to them. And then I get to go to our alumni and donor base and say, hey, does this interest you? Can you help support this or that program? And at Centenary College, we have over 450 student athletes who are playing 20 different varsity sports. And I'll tell you a little bit about, including, by the way, the newest NCAA sport. Has anyone ever heard of stunt? Everybody's heard of soccer and swimming, but stunt is basically competitive cheer. So we even have a stunt team, and they traveled all around the region this past spring and fall and did pretty well. Let me tell you something about athletics. And how many of you have heard about D1 before? Have you heard that phrase, D1 athletics? So that stands for Division I. And that's typically the most competitive schools, most competitive athletes, most talented athletes, not always, but mostly those are the ones, the Division I schools, like the UTs or A&Ms or LSUs, those are Division I schools, and they attract very, very talented athletes. There's also Division II, and then there's Division III. And my college is Division III. And I'll tell you why Division III student athletes are my favorite. So you said you've heard of D1. Have you heard of the phrase NIL? Yeah, some of you have. So NIL stands for name, image, likeness. So that means Division I and Division II student athletes, and I say Division I and Division II, Division III as well, but mostly Division I and Division II have a huge pot of money, an NIL collective. In fact, Arch Manning at the University of Texas last year, he was the backup quarterback. He made $6.5 million. But Division III, so Division I and Division II, they get paid to play because they have scholarships and they have NIL, athletic scholarships. But in Division III, our student athletes pay to play. They pay their own tuition, they pay their own room, and they pay their own board. Division III is not allowed to have athletic scholarships. And so the D3 athlete, the ones that I get to work with on a day in and day out basis, are my favorite athlete because they don't do it to back up the quarterback for $6.5 million. They do it because they love the game that they've been playing their entire life. So that's what I've been doing about the last year and a half or so, and it's by far the best job I've ever had. I really enjoy it. But as I said, for the 20 years before that, I was a United Methodist pastor. I led congregations and I preached every single week. I ministered to the sick. But as the book of Ecclesiastes and the band called The Byrds tells us, to everything there is a season. You know that song, right? Or maybe I should say, since I'm in church, you know that scripture, right? But that season of my life, while enjoyable and fulfilling, is now over. But because my good friend Chris Pulliam lets me come and fill in for him once in a while, I still, on occasion, get to do this. And I'm forever in his debt for allowing me to do so. And I'll tell you what, preaching periodically is way better than preaching every single week. And I'll tell you why. Well, there's a couple of reasons, but I'll tell you the main reason. The main reason is because I get to preach on whatever I want. Every time I get in front of you, I'm going to pick out one of my favorite scriptures, and that's what I get to do. And this day, a day on which we honor and remember our mothers and our mother figures, I decided I wanted to preach from my very favorite gospel on my very favorite miracle. It was, of course, the Gospel of John, And the miracle is the feeding of the 5,000. Now, perhaps I like John's gospel because I've always likened John to myself for a couple of different reasons. But one primarily is that John is, have you ever heard John, the Gospel of John, referred to as the rebel gospel? It's often referred to as the rebel gospel because we have the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that are largely the same. They have large even chunks of the same author. We don't know who all the authors are. They have the same stories, many of the same stories. Jesus generally follows the same path, does generally the same things. But then we have John, who says no, and throws it all aside, and he tells his own story of Jesus. His own description, even its language, is vastly different than the synoptic gospels. So I think that's the reason I like John more than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I think maybe the reason that I like this miracle more than perhaps some of the others is because it's practical. Jesus sees a need and meets it. He sees a problem and he solves it. There were hungry people and he gave them food. You see, Jesus was looking out on a massive crowd and realized that it would be dark soon or it would be late soon. Realized that they didn't bring a lunch with them that day. Realized that they would be hungry. Further realized they had no easy access to food. No Wendy's or what's over here? Canes, Raising Canes. And he knew that feeding them, while not required, but if that were to happen, that responsibility would fall to him and to his disciples. So he saw a need and he met it. And I like that. But this miracle of food, this story of fishes and loaves, like most stories in the Bible, to be clear and honest, doesn't stand in isolation. It, in fact, in John's gospel in particular, this miracle is intimately tied to 6 other miracles. And here are the other 6, some of which you'll be familiar, I'm certain. Turning water into wine, my favorite of the miracles. Healing the royal official's son. Healing of the paralytic. Walking on water. Healing the blind. And then perhaps the most amazing one of all, raising Lazarus from the dead. So those 6 plus the miracle that we talked about this morning, or we read this morning, the feeding of the 5,000, those are referred to collectively as the 7 signs in John's gospel. Signs that Jesus is indeed the Messiah, the Son of God. The 7 signs of John's gospel work in concert to help us, the reader and the believer, and originally, of course, the hearer of these stories, understand who Jesus is. And perhaps more importantly, why he came to earth. But of those 7 miracles, those 7 signs outlined in John's gospel, this one, the one that we read this morning, the feeding of the 5,000, stands out to me simply because of the sheer number of people affected by this miracle. Because Jesus was preaching in this instance, not just to his 12 disciples and perhaps a few followers. He wasn't preaching to a group of religious leaders in the temple or a synagogue. He was in fact preaching to thousands of people. It was a huge crowd. And when I say a huge crowd, the scriptures do kind of give us an idea of how many people were there. They say about 5,000. But if you think about it contextually, if you think about the time during which Jesus lived and walked the earth, what that likely means, it doesn't say this specifically, but what that likely means is that there were 5,000 men gathered there. And so only the men would have been counted. I'm certain you know this, but if you know anything about the culture in which the Bible was written down, you know that women were often overlooked. That's a very kind way to put that, actually. They were largely treated like property. They were to be, seen and not heard. But rest assured, there were women in this crowd. There were children, likely, in this crowd. And so when we see and hear the number, or really any number in the Bible, it tells us there's probably 5,000 men. And the reason I know there would have been women there, the reason I know there would have been children there, that's more than just conjecture. We know this because think about what we know about Jesus. Not the part that we Christians know, Son of God, risen Messiah. But think about Jesus from a practical standpoint. He did really cool things. And I don't mean that facetiously. He would raise people from the dead, as we heard. He would. There was even a point that a dove landed on his shoulder. A disembodied voice said, "This is my son." If you went to where Jesus was, you're going to see something really cool or hear something really cool, and people would have followed him. And they would follow him to hear these things and see these things. And so wherever Jesus went, there was a crowd of not just men, but women and children, of course. And so we really think, I've read articles that say really probably there were 5,000 men, but probably closer to 15,000 people. This is a huge crowd. And as I said, at one point it's clear the hour is getting late. And I don't know about you, but I've thought that preachers sometimes go on a little too long. I don't know why you laughed at that. And Jesus was going on and on. And the hour was getting late and people were getting hungry, but they wouldn't go home. I don't think we have that issue here. And Jesus begs a question of one of his disciples. Where are we to buy bread enough for these people? The question, he really even says, 6 months' wages is the response. 6 months' wages would not even begin to be enough to feed all these people, Jesus. What are you thinking? That part isn't said, but I'm certain it was thought. How in the world are we going to feed these people? There's 15,000 people here. But Jesus seems unperturbed by this logical and factual thing that his disciple points out. This clear and present danger to Jesus' goal of feeding them. We don't have bread. We don't have money to buy bread. Well, wait a minute. We do have something. We got these 5 barley loaves, a couple of dried fish. Come on, Jesus. That's not enough for the 13 of us, much less the 15 or so thousand people gathered here. Jesus, again, seems unperturbed by this fact that what we have isn't enough. He seems unperturbed. I always thought this was not strange, just it always caught my attention because in the midst of him being unperturbed by this, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources, Jesus just turns to the crowd and says, have a seat. As though it was already decided that we had enough, that there was enough. And so he says, have a seat, and the crowd of 10 or 15,000 sits down. And Jesus gives thanks for the few pieces of bread and a couple of dried fish that they have, and They have a meal together. They break bread together, as we will in just a moment. And at the end of the meal, there are 12 baskets full of food that the people didn't eat. Implying, of course, that there was so much food to eat that they had too much. More they had left over than when they began the meal, when everything and everyone knew we did not have enough. It turned out there was more than enough. I'm a guy who likes to ask questions. I'm a skeptic. I have been all of my life. I know this thing. How do you know? That's my first question, often. So there's a question for me, maybe not for you, as to what actually happened. Did the bread, the barley loaves, and the 2 fish, did they really multiply? Like magic? Or did people who were scared of scarcity and unwilling to share, did they finally begin to share when they realized, oh wait, we might have enough? Did they begin to share only after they realized there would be enough to help? Who knows? Who knows what actually happened with the material things there? But I think that, and maybe your brain works like this too, I think about this miracle when probing the details, when questioning the veracity and generally being skeptical about the facts. I don't know that that's the best way to be spending our time with this particular miracle. Because, like many places in the Bible, although I believe questioning and skepticism and faith do go strongly hand in hand, it's not always the best practice. Because I don't know that that's the point of this particular miracle. How it happened, who knows? That it happened is also important. Because however it was accomplished, there was something amazing about what Jesus did. He fed the hungry. Yes, there is, of course, the essence of this miracle is that he, and I started with this, that he did something that was practical. He saw a need and he met it. There was no music that we know of. No explosion of light, no doves this time. And we know that Jesus was prone to the dramatic, was prone to the fantastic. I mean, this is the guy who was raised from the dead. He did these fantastic things. But this doesn't live in the realm of the fantastic, this miracle in particular. It lives in the realm of practicality. Jesus noticed that there was hungry people, asked if there was enough to share, and worked with what he had. It's one of my favorite things about Jesus. No nonsense kind of guy, straight shooter. Calls him like he sees him. And I try to be that way as well. I don't like to draw attention to myself necessarily in ways that I'm not supposed to. And that was Jesus too. He never shied from the spotlight when he needed to, especially if it meant an injustice was exposed or an evildoer was brought to light. But more often than not, Jesus saw people and saw their need and met the need. You'll remember along with me that Jesus spent most of his time with prostitutes and tax collectors and sick people and those on the fringes of society that society had decided they didn't want anything to do with. That's where Jesus spent his time. And here's the crazy thing. When Jesus was around, he was enough. More often than not, Christ didn't really have to perform miracles or signs or healings. More often than not, Jesus was in the midst of people, saw a need, and met it. And the reason I keep repeating that phrase is because, rightfully so, we elevate Jesus on a pedestal, whether metaphorically or otherwise, sometimes literally. If you go to churches, you can see Jesus on pedestals above you. And like I said, that's appropriate. because Jesus is the Messiah, the risen Christ, the Son of God. But most of what Jesus did was exactly what you and I can do. Because while Jesus was fully divine, that great paradox tells us he was also fully human. With the same limitations that you and I have. With the same fears, with the same anxieties. And yet, more often than not, it was enough. And this parable is just one more example. 2 loaves of bread, 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, whatever it was. Boom. Fish sandwiches for everybody. Who knows what they had to drink? Maybe somebody, don't remember those Nalgene bottles or what do they call it? What do you carry? Stanley. Maybe they had a Stanley bottle and it was enough too. But the crux of this miracle, the meat of it, is that it was enough. And sisters and brothers, I think that's something we can draw a strong lesson from. Because during a time when our political landscape draws ire and anxiety, during a time when there is war and famine, during a time when it seems as though uncertainty is king, we can look at this story and remember it's enough. We are enough. We're loved just the way we were created, just the way we are. And when it seems like every time we turn on the TV or look at our phones, we are berated with the fantastic and fearful. Remember that Jesus lived in an anxiety-ridden time also. And during that anxiety-ridden time, Jesus turned to a crowd, had them sit down, and fed them. And it was enough. Amen.